There's a lot to slackline, and it's really hard to capture the feelings you get from any particular instance. But the experiences, the people, and the sense of accomplishment are unlike anything else. Each week, join me for a slackline story, told by slackers from all over, in an exploration of some of the more salient things that make this pastime so unique. This first series is about rigging, since it's arguably one of the first things you learn how to do when slacklining. Whether it's a 2-inch ratchet or a padded frost knot in your backup webbing, rigging necessarily takes place before the actual slacklining, and sometimes takes longer than the slacklining itself. So it's the first part of 3 that I consider foundational to the slackline experience. Ready for some Rigamarole? Storytellers were not informed of the topic ahead of time. All they knew entering was they would be recording an interview.
It's so sweet in here. You guys are crushing it.
We'll see.
It's so beautiful.
This is the first day that it's snowing, right? So...
My first name's Darcy. I've been slacklining, I think, 7 or 8 years, maybe.
What's your go-to slackline?
I mean, my go-to slackline is the Yoga Slackers E-line. So the second rig at Smith Rock is the story you want to hear?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I didn't actually know anybody on the crew face-to-face until I got there that morning. And a couple mutual friends knew the local guy. So my acrobatics coaches, Jason and Chelsea, are highliners, and they knew this guy, Mark. My other friend, Natalie, knows him too. So people I know and trust knew Mark. But other than that, I was like no connection really to the crew that day. And yeah, that was a pretty wild feeling. I think I've never done anything before that day where I was meeting people on site. We had basically, the plan ahead of time was that just I would pack the rig, and somebody else agreed to bring tension so that I could like leave my big heavy pulleys and rope, which is what I still have for tension. So if I could leave that part out of my rig, it was lighter and I could fly it more reasonably. So I packed a rig with no actual like, I've never seen the anchors. I don't know how far back the bolts are. So I didn't really know anything. So I just packed everything as much as I could fit in, like 3 or 4 different lengths of static rope and quick links in case we needed them because I didn't know if it was glue-ins or not. And just like packed everything. I did pack webbing, but then we ended up using somebody else's because we ended up deciding to do a bigger gap than we originally planned. So, and then so I roll into the parking lot in the morning and everyone's really gung-ho. Everyone's like, ready to hike in like 3 minutes. Meanwhile, I was expecting, you know, like a consult, like a quick like chat about which pieces from the roller bag would be the best, you know, and I started to feel just kind of, I get scared. You know I get scared. Highlining, rigging, all of it scares me. But so right away I start to feel this, you know, fear and like, what if I haven't planned right? And so I start engaging with Mark, and he's so casual about it because he does all of this all the time and is so wildly comfortable on anything at Smith Rock. And then 2 of the people in the crew were living there but had just moved to the area. There was a guy named Alex who actually I had met once before but didn't remember. He used to live here. He's friends with Finn. And then there was a Canadian guy whose name I can't remember anymore, but there's a Canadian guy that happened to be passing through who joined us for the day too. So I started chatting with Mark and did get him to talk to me about like, you know, the anchors and which length of rope would be best. And so we started figuring it out and did get everything packed and ready to go. It was spring. It was like May, spring. Cool in the morning, warm enough in the afternoon to like strip down to your base layer. But then the wind picks up and you get pretty chilly again, you know? We were originally planning to do the line at Monkey Face that comes out of the monkey's mouth. And Mark and the Canadian guy were going to climb the tower. That was our plan. So we like hiked into that location. It was actually not super far or anything really difficult. The hike was fine. I think we probably got started by like I hate to estimate, but maybe 9 a.m. But then what we forgot to plan for at that time was that the Monkey Face is a popular climb. And when we got there, there was a huge queue of climbers waiting to get started on Monkey Face. So we realized pretty quickly it was going to be like mid-afternoon before they could even get their turn to climb Monkey Face. So we bailed on that project and moved to another location, which again, Mark knows everything. So he was just like, oh, let's walk about 70 feet this way and down over this way, and we'll get to another line called the Flying Snafu. It is another tower line, so the plan is still those two were going to go climb the tower, and I was going to rig from the land side. And then the rest of the crew was, like, working the tagline. So they went off and started to, like, work for us, like, walking around from one side to the other and getting the tagline ready. So that part was being handled, which, of course, is helpful. Even just as we're hiking into it, Mark's excitement was building, and he was picking up his hiking pace, and he was hiking faster. I felt already, like, just slow down, slow down. And, so they're just hiking ahead, and they hike past, like, roughly where the landside anchors are, and they just, like, point, like, yell, you're up there, and then they just keep hiking. And, like, that's the end of, like, the introduction, you know, to the area. And Mark's a super comfortable climber, too, you know, and so we've never had a conversation, he and I, about the fact that, like, I climb some, but I'm not a very sure climber, and I never climb without ropes or anything like that. And I walk over to where he points, and it's a little bit of like, I mean, most people probably wouldn't call it a climb. Most people would call it a scramble. But to me, it felt like a 5-7-ish. Like, it felt like a climb. It's a little bit of a climb to get to where I'm supposed to rig. And it's, like, gravelly, and it's super exposed. It's, like, the clearly the easiest path up is also, like, all the way on the outside edge of, like, the giant feature. It's not like your fall is just going to be, like, there. It's like, well, if you do fall, that's game over, you know? So they're, like, they've free soloed the tower at this point, and I'm just still over here looking at this boulder and, like, freaking out about getting myself and my gear up onto this boulder without dying. I've got a big heavy pack and, like, heavy gear, and I never climb anything without ropes, and I'm in hiking boots. I don't have climbing shoes. And I just, like, look at this thing, and I'm like, so I spend, like, a solid 20 minutes, like, not even feeling capable of, like, moving to the place where I'm supposed to rig from. And Alex watched me, like, lose my shit. I was, like, just, like, having a full-on rant of, like, what the fuck am I doing here? I don't know any of these people. This is a terrible idea. I'm not equipped for this. What am I trying to prove? Like, I was just, like, losing my mind immediately. I can't believe how long and how intense my, like, falling apart was, just standing there looking at this boulder. You're just like looking at this probably like 5-6 scramble and just like absolutely paralyzed, like couldn't fathom that this was a thing I was gonna do. I remember all the things I said to myself about why it was a terrible idea and why I shouldn't, like why would I risk my life to I can remember all of that. And then I know that Alex was there when I did get around to being like, okay, I guess maybe I'll just climb it real quick. And I think, I can't even remember it exactly, but I think he and I had some sort of like, this probably isn't even really a climb. I think we started having that chat, like, this is probably just like a hike. This is probably not even rated. This is probably just like a 5-5 hike, steep hike. And I should probably just go ahead and get myself up there then, huh? And he just kind of not. So I think it kind of sounded like that. And I just focused and calmed down enough to like claw and drag myself up over this boulder in like the most terrified state. Like, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. Which I didn't die, so that's great. It takes me probably like another 5 or 10 minutes then to recover from the fact that like that first thing was already like, it's like I haven't even started doing the thing I said we were gonna come, and I just like had a full-on mental like wrestling match. So yeah, 5-10 minutes later, I started actually taking gear out of my pack. I did forget something. So I had only recently gotten my soft release. So for a long time, I had pulleys that, so I started rigging maybe like 5-6 years ago. Is it that long ago? Yeah, 5 years ago. Probably 5 years ago is when I started rigging high lines. And at that point, line grips, a handful of people had line grips, but not very many people did yet. And my system was like the Slackline Brothers pulleys and big, thick, static rope that I like left in line. So I'd had a line grip for a little while and started using that, but I had just gotten my soft release. So of course I forgot an extra shackle because the soft release like creates one more connection point in the system. So, but the guy who brought his own pulleys, he had a handful of bits and pieces in his bag. So I was like, grabbed a shackle off him, inch my way down to where the bolts are, and they're pretty close to the edge, which is like nice in some ways because your anchor doesn't have to be super big and extended to get out over the edge, but also tough in the other way where you pretty much, you know, you have to be anchored or very, very sure of yourself like the whole time you're working. Yeah. And there wasn't any extra bolts for an anchor, so you had to kind of anchor onto the same bolts as you were trying to rig off. And I built an X, and I got that all tied together and was trying to think about how to like get out into the space beyond the cliff to like equalize it and like get it into the right position and keep building from there, and had like a whole nother set of like mental roadblock. And Mark and the Canadian guy were on the far end, like pretty much like ready to have webbing sent to them, you know, and just trying to sort it all out. And but I couldn't get my head around it. And so I hollered across to the guys on the other side, and I was like, hey, you guys, I'm having a really hard time over here mentally. I'm not trusting myself. I was like, can one of you guys just like rappel down and come over and help me on this side? And then that's when I found out they didn't take a rope up with them. Crazy. I thought they would like rope climb it, but they didn't. They just climbed it without a rope.
I forgot that. They just
planned to come across the slack line to me. So they didn't have a rope. And I was like, oh, okay, sad face. Cry a little, have a little tantrum. There was some part of me that wanted to like step up and prove myself and be like, just handle all of this and get it done. But then there was this other part of me that was like, if you're not sure and you're not comfortable, like nobody's life is going to be improved by you just like forcing it, you know? I was overwhelmed also at the idea that they were just going to trust me to come across onto an anchor I built when they never met me before. And I almost never rig without like a second person who's like checking my work. So I ended up just telling them, I was like, I am uncomfortable and scared about everything in this situation. And they ended up using something they had on them to drop a carabiner down and have the people who had been working on the tagline send up a dynamic rope to them. So Mark did come down and came around, and once he was there and we were working together as a team, like my headspace changed entirely. You know, and when I met Mark that morning, he seemed so wild to me. He seemed so wild and like a little crazy to me because I can be so much more cautious, and I feel like I need so much more support and security. But then by the end of the day, I had come to trust him. I had come to like find the communication with him. So now I would consider him a trusted colleague. And we finished it, and we built it, and Canadian guy came across the line to us, you know, and everything was fine. And it all ended up being so beautiful. I mean, the Flying Snafu really, it is got to be the most beautiful line, I think, that I've been part of the rig of so far. Wow. I think it's just over 100 feet long, so not a super long gap. Yeah. Right underneath the line, you probably are looking at, like, maybe 70, 80 feet to like the first bit of like cliff underneath you, but then it's pretty much cliff, and the vast exposure is probably about 500 feet. I think it's about 500 feet to the like the valley floor at Smith when you're up on top of most things. Just the vastness of the exposure and the tower, it's such a pretty line, and it ended up being this beautiful day. But for a long part of that day, I just was a head case. I did take one session, which honestly, by the time the line was rigged that day, I could have been done. I had had enough challenges, you know. I could have just been done for the day. And I did eventually decide that like tying in at least once was important. And I went out, I sat on it, and I stared at the beauty, and I laid down on it, and I hung underneath it, and I just, like, I enjoyed the space of the slackline, but, like, to face another round of, like, the fear that I face when I try to stand still on highlines, still to this day, I usually face, like, a whole nother round of, like, what the fucks and freaking out. And so that wasn't available, you know. I just didn't even have that in me to even consider. I think I got in Chongo shape one time, and immediately it was like, fuck off. Just, like, immediately it was like, And then I just went back to, like, sitting around and laying on it. And just even to lay down on a line like that and then to sit back up, and you go from, like, staring at the sky, and it sort of doesn't feel that extraordinary. It just feels like any other slackline. If you know, it still feels amazing, but you're just like, oh right. And then you sit back up and you're like, oh right, I'm way out in the fucking middle of space, you know. And you look around again, and so I mean, it was beautiful. My session was beautiful. It wasn't any kind of like rad sending or like milestone for me and like highlighting success in terms of steps or whatever, but it was beautiful. Canadian guy, I feel terrible that I don't know his name, and now I'm probably going to go home and like be in my friends on Facebook trying to figure out. I'll send you an edit. Yeah. I'll be like, edit. Canadian's guy's name was actually, he was a good slackliner, so he had a bunch of beautiful walks on it. I think he was the only one that day that like crossed the line. Mark had a little session similar to mine where I think he just hung out for a little bit. He had been working an adventure race, I believe, at Smith Rock, like belaying and managing a climb station and an adventure race for like 2 days prior. So he was pretty like spent already, and then ended up doing a lot of work in the rig, obviously. So I think he didn't really care to spend a lot of energy sessioning the line. And then Alex got out there and had some stands, I think several stands and a handful of steps. And he was still brand new-ish to highlining, so that was actually, I was like, that's amazing that he's getting on these big exposed lines and taking a handful of steps, you know. So beautiful sessions. I mean, it's always nice to have at least one person that really goes out and walks the line. So D-rig was smooth like butter. Yeah, like no trouble. Easy peasy. It took like I feel like it took 5 minutes. It probably took more than 5 minutes, but it felt like it took like 5 minutes. And you know, in the previous time I rigged at Smith Rock, it was like walk around anchors. There was no tower involved. I went with my boyfriend and a very dear old friend who I've rigged with before, and I felt so like such a team process from start to finish. And this was so radically different where like these guys were totally just like, they do this all the time, and probably with, you know, all kinds of crews. And I think also there's a male and female difference when it comes to what people need in terms of trust. Yeah. Like I think generally women, we have more of a need to feel like we trust and we're close to the people we're taking these projects on with than men. I think men can more easily just be like, you're a slackliner, I'm a slackliner, let's go do the thing. We do the task, everyone will be fine, you know, where women, I think we need much more of that sense of camaraderie and trust, and the people I'm working with know what my strengths and limitations are, you know. Because if they'd known me at all, if we'd ever been on any mission before together, they would have never pointed at that boulder in the first place and just been like, you're up there. Because anyone who knows me would have been like, Darcy will need a little help with that. Yeah. They're gonna be like, hi, like being like, Darcy, just jump out there, and like all of you know that's not the role I'm gonna have. You know, they were just like, I guess maybe just because the people we knew in common are super rad. Like Natalie, yeah. Jason and Chelsea, yeah. Any of the people we had in common would have been people, I'm sure, that would have just been like, yeah, I got this, you know, and tackled it right away. It's such an interesting thing to work with people that don't know you and don't know how, like, where you might freak out. And I guess maybe most highliners and climbers are not as likely to lose their shit as I am.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Darcy, for your honesty and wisdom. Follow Darcy's adventures on Instagram at Yoga Darcy.